Democracy is a hard thing to pinpoint. The word is derived from Greek and means something like rule by people, rule by the people, or popular rule, but in practice it can mean different things. In comparative politics, you can generally identify 4 different characteristics after which you can categorize different democracies. First, Republicanism. Second, presidentiality. Third, federalism. And fourth, judicial review. The first one, Republicanism, is rather straightforward. Does your country have a monarch or not? A country with a monarch is a monarchy, and a country without a monarch is a republic. You could try to identify special cases, like subnational monarchies within republics, for example in the Philippines or in Burkina Faso, or you could draw a division between different hereditary and elective monarchies. However, the existence of a monarchy or a subnational monarchy does not in itself allow the observer to draw conclusions over the state of democracy in that country. There are monarchies that are democratic, like the United Kingdom, and there are republics that are authoritarian, like Chad. There are also democratic republics, like Finland, and authoritarian monarchies, like Saudi Arabia. However, a democratic monarchy usually has some weird consequences. The United Kingdom, for example, does not have a constitution. It instead relies on precedent, and that is a direct result of its monarchy. Moving on to presidentiality, this one is a bit more tricky. First and foremost, you differentiate between the presidential and the parliamentary system. The main difference between the two models lies in the connection between the executive and the legislative branches of government. In the parliamentary system, the legislature is the clearly supreme branch, and it elects the head of government, who then goes on to control the executive branch. In the Netherlands and Germany, for example, the voters vote on their representatives, who in turn, depending on the majorities in parliament, then vote for the leader, the head of government, who then controls the executive. The legislature usually has the authority to remove the head of government from office, making the head of government accountable to parliament. Now, in the presidential system, the head of government is determined by the voters and usually fills the role of head of state as well, whereas the two are usually separate in parliamentary systems. In a presidential system, the head of state is not accountable to parliament, and it is not intended, except in cases of utmost emergency, for the head of state to be removed from office by parliament. The most famous example of a presidential system is the United States of America. Some countries utilize the concept of executive presidencies, where the head of state and head of government are the same person, but they are accountable to parliament, making them a mixed case. Examples of executive presidencies are South Africa, Botswana, Myanmar, and Suriname. Now, speaking of mixed cases, there are other countries that don't like either presidential or parliamentary systems, and that also don't use executive presidencies. These are the semi-presidential systems, and the most famous one is France. A semi-presidential system is largely a parliamentary system, with a head of government subservient to parliament, but the semi-presidential system has a directly elected head of state who is not a figurehead. In classical parliamentary systems, people like the Dutch monarch or the German president do not take part in matters of policy. For the French president, that is different. The semi-presidential systems are then further divided into 2 separate types. The premier presidential systems have a president appoint the prime minister and the cabinet, but only give parliament the right to remove them. The president parliamentary systems give the president both the right to appoint and to dismiss the prime minister and the cabinet. The first is the French model, the second is the Russian model. One last thing that needs to be mentioned is the concept of cohabitation. The word comes from French politics, where it meant a president who faced a prime minister and parliamentary majority from an opposing party. This concept also frequently happens in pure presidential systems, just without the head of government. The United States, for example, frequently sees one of the parties control the White House and the other party control Congress. Thirdly, there is federalism. Basically, you have 2 general options. You can be a federal state or a unitary state. We can look at France and Germany as examples. France is unitary, Germany is federal. But make no mistake, both of them are divided into smaller subnational units. The difference is that the regions, departments, and communes of France have no guaranteed constitutional privileges against the federal government in Paris. That is different in Germany, where the 16 states have guaranteed privilege rights in several areas, including education and police policy. An even more radical example of constitutional federalism is the 10th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States.
The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people.
However, the United States is arguably less federalized than Germany. You see, there is the concept of Symmetric Federalism, where all subnational regions are the same. In Germany, there are 16 states and that's it, all states have the same rights. In the United States, there are 50 states, but several American regions are not part of any state, with many inhabitants thus not being citizens of a state, including the people in the capital city Washington DC and on the island of Puerto Rico, among others. Now, the US is still officially a symmetric federation because they never planned to have territories that weren't part of states, and it is at least implied that all territories will eventually gain statehood or join a state, even though this is really only a realistic prospect for Washington and for Puerto Rico. Now, you might ask, if there is symmetric federalism, is there asymmetric federalism as well? Well, yes, the most famous example is the Russian Federation. All of its subdivisions are collectively known as the subjects of the Russian Federation, but there are different types. As of the writing of this video, there are 46 oblasts, 22 republics, 9 krais, 4 autonomous okrugs, 3 federal cities, and 1 autonomous oblast. I won't go into too much detail, but the more direct subjects, like the oblasts, are comparable to subdivisions of a unitary country like France, whereas the more autonomous subjects, particularly the republics, are more like US states, with their own constitutions and legislative bodies. So now, we have unitary countries, we have symmetrical federalism, and we have asymmetrical federalism. Good enough for now. We have discussed both the executive and the legislature when talking about presidentiality, but the judiciary too must be considered when studying democratic institutions. If a system is to value separation of powers, then the legislature must be stopped from drafting unconstitutional laws. This can be done by requiring the signature from the head of state, but it is usually more effective and provides the system with more expertise if such a judicial review is left to judges. The authority to judge government policy is usually reserved to the highest judicial institution, the Supreme Court. Both in the United States and in France, you could in the past observe the Supreme Court give to itself the authority to declare legislation unconstitutional. Such authority is usually vital in a parliamentary system, where the head of state cannot keep parliament in check, and it is especially important to federal countries, where the rights of the subjects have to be protected from the federal government. In fact, all countries that are federalized also have judicial review, with one exception. Switzerland has instead chosen to give the constitutional authority not to a Supreme Court, but directly to its people through referendums. Direct democracy in Switzerland has thus replaced the need for a Supreme Court with judicial review. That about wraps up the 4 categories in which democracies can be grouped, allowing for up to 16 combinations. Now, it should be noted that this scheme is to be handled carefully with more authoritarian styles of government. Just because a country has a constitution and democratic institutions on paper, these are only really useful to the citizens if they aren't the pawns of some dictator. Anyway, it might be interesting to categorize some examples just to show how the system works. The United States is a republic, it has a presidential system, it utilizes symmetrical federalism, and it does have a Supreme Court that can review Congress. The United Kingdom is a monarchy, it uses a parliamentary system, it is a unitary state, and the Supreme Court does not have the power to override the House of Commons. Japan is a monarchy with a parliamentary system, it is a unitary state, and the Japanese Supreme Court does have the power of judicial review. France is a republic, semi-presidential, unitary, and since 2008 it has judicial review. Germany is a republic, parliamentary, symmetrically federal, and the Supreme Court has judicial review. And there are some more examples for you right there on screen. Thank you for watching.